The Southern Sweden cohort study. What these researchers did was they took almost 30,000 women. They tracked these women over a 20-year period. They looked at their light exposure habits, so how much sunlight they got. They had three sort of groups of women, right? The woman who got the least amount of sun, the woman who got a little bit more, right in the middle, and then the woman who got the most amount of sun exposure. And then they looked at their health outcomes throughout their lives. And what they showed was that the woman who had the most amount of sun exposure had the longest lifespan. So they had the longer lifespan compared to the women who had the least amount of sun exposure. And the data there was they lived 2 times longer lives than the women who had the least amount of sun exposure. This is a correlational study, right? So we can't conclude causation from that. But what's really interesting is that they showed what's called a dose-dependent curve. In correlational studies, if you have a dose-dependent curve, meaning that if you increase the dose of something, you increase, let's say, a medication, or you increase, in this case, sun exposure, you have a increase in whatever that outcome is, right? In this study, it was mortality. So what they saw was that as you increase sun exposure, as you go from the least amount of sun exposure to the middle to the most, you had an increase in longevity, right? You had a decrease in mortality. These women were living longer lives. And that dose-dependent curve doesn't prove causation, right? But it does validate the correlation that we see a little more. These women, right, who are getting more sun exposure are dying less frequently than those with the least amount of sun exposure. And they also looked at smoking habits of these women.
Yeah, this was wild, by the way. When you talked about this was kind of crazy.
Yeah, this is crazy. What they showed is that those women who got the most amount of sun exposure, but also smoked, had the same mortality as those women who didn't get sun exposure, but smoked. So those women who got the most amount of sun exposure and did not smoke died at the same rate as those women who didn't get sun exposure, but smoked, showing that basically sun exposure habits are on the same playing field as smoking, right? So it's pretty mind-blowing, right? When we look at smoking, right, it's pretty well known that smoking causes lung cancer, right? But we don't actually have a randomized placebo-controlled trial of women who smoke and women who don't smoke, right? We can't just tell, all right, you group, you go smoke and then you guys don't smoke and let's see your outcomes, right? We don't have that because that would
let's follow you for like 50 years and let's see what happens. We don't actually have that data.
We don't have that data. That's unethical, right? What we have is correlational studies. And the correlation is so strong, right? We have a dose-dependent curve. We have a very strong correlation. Then we also have, animal models and more in vitro cell models. And we see the same outcomes, right? But even with smoking, right? We don't have a causal study, a randomized placebo-controlled trial study of smoking causes lung cancer, but we say it causes it because we have such a strong correlation. Same thing with this correlational Southern Sweden cohort study, right? With sun exposure and mortality. Now, what's really great, so this is 30,000 women. A researcher by the name of Dr. Richard Weller, he is a dermatologist out of the UK. He looked at the study, and dermatologists, right? Most dermatologists, tell you avoid the sun as much as possible. And he's actually doing some really great research. He's actually looking over these recommendations from these dermatologists and sort of questioning this stuff and really digging into the research that is out there. Him and his team, they replicated this Sweden study in the UK with 400,000 individuals, and they saw the exact same results. So the people who got more sun exposure had longer lives. They died less from all causes, so all-cause mortality, dying from any cause, whether that be cardiovascular disease, cancer, things like that. And so this should shock a lot of people. For me, perhaps you as well, it sort of is common sense, right? When we look at our evolutionary history, we lived out in the sun. We were outdoors 24/7. A lot of things were different back then. We were living healthier lives out in the sun. That clearly is showing up in the literature, right? There's actually not a study out there showing that more sun exposure increases mortality. So more sun exposure decreases longevity. There's not a study out there. All the studies show more sun exposure increases longevity, increases your lifespan.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I think already our audience can pick up on the fact that you are so passionate about this topic. And that's why we reached out to you. It's a first that we have a student. You are a pre-medical student at Davidson College, beautiful university, great university. And I have come across your viral content on social media doing exactly what you're doing here. You're breaking things down and you're just showcasing the studies. Some of these studies have been out for a little bit, maybe even a couple of years, but they're just not getting attention. And why that's so important is that so many people look at the sun and they think of it, the topic of sun and getting sunlight. They're like, it's a nice bonus. And okay, yeah, we know, we think we know because of education that's out there. I'm putting that in air quotes. We think we know, like, don't get too much sun because it's bad for you because you'll get skin cancer. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's not really a major health intervention. And really what you've been doing with your content over the last year is you've been showing people like, this is so important. This actually might be one of the most underrated areas of health that can help you actually achieve so many of the health goals that we are all shooting for, like improved longevity, improved metabolic health, reduction of all-cause mortality, improved mood, improved vision. And so this is why I asked you on the podcast, because we're here to break some of that down. And as I mentioned earlier, talk about this 2026 21-day light challenge. You have a beginner mode and an advanced mode. We'll get into that in a second. If you're open to it, let's go into a couple other, papers that are out there and studies highlighting the power of the sun specifically. This one was interesting. It was a little bit smaller, but this was one of the papers that you sent over, and it was around how red light, near infrared light, can actually reduce the stay of people who are in the ICU. And this was a triple blinded study. Can you talk about that?
As you mentioned, triple blinded study. What that means, everyone was blinded, meaning that they didn't know who got the intervention, right? So the people actually getting the intervention didn't know that they were getting the intervention. The people giving the intervention didn't know if they were giving the placebo, sort of fake intervention, or the real intervention. And then the people analyzing the data didn't know at first, right? So triple blinded is probably one of the top tier in terms of like how good you can get this study to be. What they did was they made these sort of light blankets, they called it in the study. These light blankets consisted of LED lighting. And I want to also clarify this to some people because I've gotten a lot of questions about this. So LED lighting, when we think about LED lighting, we think about the standard just LED light bulb, right? That has its consequences. We can talk about that later. But LED light is just simply a light emitting diode. It's a device that emits light. You can emit light in any wavelength from these LEDs. So they had LED blankets that emitted red and near infrared light. Quickly here, red light is a part of the sunlight spectrum. We have, sunlight spectrum is consisted of UV, blue into the visible, red is longer in the visible, and then near infrared and infrared, which is invisible to the human eye, but has a lot of effects on the human body, as we'll talk about. And so they had these LED blankets with red and infrared light. They put it on the legs and the arms of these hospital ICU patients. So these patients that are in critical care, right, units, they're in the hospital, they're in the ICU. And what they saw was they had two groups, the sham group. So the group who thought they may have been getting the red light. So they put the blankets on, but they never actually turned the switch on to turn the light on, right? Mm-hmm. And then they had the other group that they put the blankets on, but they turned the switch on to turn the lights on. So two groups getting red and infrared light and not getting red and infrared light. And what they saw was the group getting the red and infrared light had a 30% reduction in hospital ICU length of stay. So the time that they were staying in the ICU, and this did not matter of what they were actually in the ICU for, which is really important here, right? So it could have been whatever it was. And in the study, they detail all the people and what they were in the ICU for. But it was across all reasons for being in the ICU. 30% reduction in length of stay. And this is like very, very dramatic. I mean, if you ask any doctor that works in the ICU, 30% reduction is not a little deal. Like that is a huge deal. Like you have medications and you have these other things for things where people are in the hospital. And if you get like a 24-hour reduction, right, that's huge. This was even more. A 30% reduction, like basically translated to, I believe, roughly like a 4-day reduction in length of stay. That varied, but 30% really huge. And we can talk about why this may be the case. This red and this infrared light is able to penetrate the human body. It's able to interact with our mitochondria. Mitochondria are, you've heard of them as the powerhouse of the cell, but there are these energy transformers. So they transform energy and they allow us to produce what's called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency of the cell. And the red and infrared light interacts with the mitochondria and has systemic effects, beneficial mitochondrial effects. And mitochondria are these organelles that fundamentally give us health, right? They give us life. And if we have, bad mitochondria, we have worse health outcomes. So we want to keep our mitochondria healthy. And one way that we do so is the light that we interact with. So yeah, this ICU study is very fascinating, very interesting. And this isn't the first study. They also did this with COVID-19 patients in the hospital. They had a huge reduction in length of stay for COVID, simply putting a red and infrared light blanket on. It was the chest, like torso area. And we see that there as well. And then when we also look at tons and tons of studies looking at where patients actually are staying, like location wise in the hospital, and their length of stay and their health outcomes. And we see that patients who are sitting by a window actually have better health outcomes in the hospital, and their length of stay gets reduced by a lot. And so, that could be various reasons. One, you're getting dynamic lighting. So that means that, the sun is constantly changing in the spectrum of light that it emits. LEDs and fluorescent light bulbs have a constant spectrum of light. They're always on the same, intensity and the same color perception. Whereas the sun in the morning, it's like sunrise is red and orange, gets more blue, and then during sunset, back to that red and orange. And you have this curve of different light that occurs during the day, and that sets what's called our circadian rhythm, our internal body clock that sets basically controls every single organ, or every single cell of our body. And so these patients, right, were presumably having a stronger circadian rhythm. But they were also, windows do block some of the beneficial red and infrared light, but they do transmit a little bit. And you're getting more red and infrared light by sitting next to a window than you would if you had no window, right? So there could be something there to that, right? Getting that infrared light coming through the window, even though it's reduced, you're still getting some. So we don't know, exactly why, but clearly there's something to that light that they're getting through a window that is benefiting their health outcomes in a hospital. So yeah, really interesting stuff. And this also isn't new, right? It's new to us who are so, if it's not in the literature, it's not true. But it's not new, like we have, before the Flexner report, hospitals across the United States had sunbeds. So they literally brought patients outside to lay out in the sun, and they had amazing outcomes. And, we're just now catching on to this. You had Roger Schwartz on the podcast, out in Loma Linda, California, and he's bringing his patients outside, getting sunlight, and he's seeing improvements in their health. And we have the literature now to back it up. But, this is also something we've known for a really long time, and doctors have known for a really long time, and doctors utilize the sun, and we see better outcomes with it. So yeah, it's really, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And that is often how science and medicine works. Things can be known to a smaller group of people, researchers, individuals who are actually studying it, but it takes a little while for ideas to populate in the zeitgeist, where now it becomes not only implemented in hospital systems at a level of scale, but that people also get that this is something that they want to prioritize. This happened with trans fats. We knew, when I say we, obviously the community that was researching it, they knew for years that trans fats were the most damaging, heart attack inducing fats that were out there for almost 20, 30 years. There was knowledge around trans fats. And this guy, actually, I looked into him, Fred Kummerow, he was one of the leading researchers that was sort of standing on the soapbox, talking to people, saying, guys, this is a problem. This isn't a mild problem. This is literally killing people early. And a small change, which is we need to get these foods, we need to get this fat out of the food system. When it finally happened, it had massive health implications, and now it's known to be a thing. Unfortunately, little trans fats can still sneak into the diet here and there, but largely we've removed them out of the system here in America. And that's the same thing in this situation. As you've mentioned, we've known for a long time, but this is getting out there, which is why I'm so passionate about people like you who are using their opportunity on social media to help spread the word. So let's continue down the pathway, if that's okay with you. And I want to make a couple more connections for our audience. Our audience knows that antioxidants are a powerful part of keeping our immune system and our body strong. And they've typically heard things like eat your berries, right? Dark chocolate. These are powerful antioxidants. But you are putting the spotlight, talking about mitochondria. You're putting on the spotlight about this connection between sun, mitochondria, and a nutrient/molecule. I don't know exactly what category it falls into. A lot of people know it as a supplement that is actually the most powerful antioxidant that's out there. And getting sunlight regularly, especially morning and evening sunlight, is a huge part of how we get this nutrient. What nutrient am I talking about, and what's the research around it?
Yeah, so this nutrient is melatonin. Most people know about melatonin, and they think of melatonin as simply a sleep-inducing molecule. So a molecule that makes us fall asleep, right? At night, our pineal gland in our brain produces melatonin in the absence of light. So when the sun goes down, when the sun sets, your body, your eyes receive that signal that the light is being reduced, and then you're through a series of chemical reactions and pathways in the brain, your body starts to produce melatonin, and you get sleepy, and then you go to bed. Now, that is what we've known for many, many years in melatonin research. Recently, actually, one of the top melatonin researchers, his name is Russell J. Ryder. He was actually one of the researchers who sort of first discovered that your body produces melatonin at night to help you fall asleep. He's now understanding that there's another type of melatonin that is produced during the day and is separate from the sleep-inducing properties of melatonin. So it doesn't actually make you fall asleep. And it is produced in the mitochondria in every cell. Every single mitochondria produces what's called subcellular melatonin. Subcellular, below cell, the cell, below the cell. So in the mitochondria. And this melatonin is produced in much more in quantity than pineal melatonin for nighttime, right? So 95% of the melatonin that your body produces is produced in the mitochondria during the day in response to light. Now, what type of light? It's infrared light. So the part of light that is invisible to the human eye. It is abundant in sunlight. So around 50% of sunlight is infrared light. And sort of I can run through the mechanism here. And basically what happens as far as we understand it now, right? This is fairly new research within the past 10-ish years. And that is new. Like we were saying, like 10 years is very new in science. Within the past few years, right? We are understanding that this light penetrates the body. When it reaches the mitochondria, it gets absorbed by a protein in the mitochondria called cytochrome C oxidase. You have this electron transport chain, which is what produces ATP. And in the electron transport chain, you have cytochrome C oxidase. When infrared light interacts with cytochrome C oxidase releases what's called nitric oxide. People may have heard about nitric oxide for cardiovascular benefits, right? It dilates your blood vessels, improves blood flow. But this nitric oxide is being produced in the mitochondria, and through that production, and then through a bunch of other chemical pathways, which if people really want to get all into this, I have a 30-minute YouTube video on my YouTube diving into the entire chemical pathway. But through a series of chemical reactions, that nitric oxide gets converted into melatonin. And this melatonin in the mitochondria acts as basically an on-site antioxidant. So your mitochondria, not only do they produce ATP, but in that process, they also produce what's called reactive oxygen species, ROS. ROS are these reactive molecules that, in high amounts are damaging. And in our current modern life, being under artificially lit environments all day long, and eating bad food and all these different things, right? Our bodies are producing high amounts of reactive oxygen species, and amounts that we generally don't want. And so when melatonin is being produced in the mitochondria, it is able to basically protect you against these reactive oxygen species. It acts as an antioxidant. And what's really fascinating, and Russell Ryder published this, so one of the first papers that I was aware of was it's a paper titled Melatonin and the Optics of the Human Body by Scott Zimmerman, who's an optics person, and then Russell Ryder. And basically what they show is that melatonin is a far stronger antioxidant than even things like glutathione, vitamin C. These are these strong antioxidants that we think of when we think of antioxidants. Melatonin actually upregulates glutathione. So it actually upregulates another key antioxidant. And then outside of upregulating other antioxidants, it also just acts as a greater antioxidant. It's able to scavenge more free radicals, more reactive oxygen species. It's able to scavenge. So for every single melatonin molecule, it's able to scavenge up to 10 reactive oxygen species. Whereas with other antioxidants, one antioxidant may only scavenge 3 to 5 reactive oxygen species, right? So melatonin is a much stronger antioxidant, and it's acting within the mitochondria of every cell. And one of the best ways to increase these melatonin productions, and again, I want to make sure people understand that this melatonin does not make you fall asleep. It's happening during the day when you're outside and when you're in and around infrared light. And so I think this is a good place to sort of say it. How do we get this infrared light? You can be in direct sunlight, but you can also be under shade. If you're under shade around greenery, you're getting tons of infrared light. Why are you getting tons of infrared light? That is because greenery, leaves, and chlorophyll molecules in the leaves. Chlorophyll molecules are the pigment that makes leaves appear green to us. Chlorophyll, not only does it absorb UV and blue light, so the shorter wavelengths of light, but it reflects the longer wavelengths of red and infrared light. So if you take, for instance, like a infrared camera. So Bob Fosbury, he's an astrophysicist. He's a great researcher who's doing some really great stuff in this field. He has a bunch of really cool photos of greenery, of trees and shrubs. And when you take a photo with an infrared camera, with the camera basically turns out to be white, right? And it looks like there's just like a bunch of like snow everywhere. It looks on these trees. It looks like the trees are filled with snow because it's reflecting all of this infrared light. And with it reflecting the infrared light, our bodies are able to absorb that infrared light, again, interact with our mitochondria, produce this subcellular melatonin, which then acts as an antioxidant against free radicals that your body is producing, and in our modern world, producing too much of it. And we can see better health outcomes. So I think that a lot of the health outcomes we see in these studies that we're talking about with red and infrared light potentially could be from this melatonin being produced in the mitochondria and basically helping out the mitochondria, the stress that's on the mitochondria with our daily living. So it's something that most people have not heard of, right? This idea that melatonin is an antioxidant. And I really think that we need to, of course, the idea that melatonin is a sleep-inducing molecule is very, like, it obviously is, but we have held so strong on that belief, and melatonin is just a sleep-inducing molecule, that we've sort of forgotten about, and we haven't paid attention to this other side of melatonin that potentially is even more important, right? So really interesting stuff. And I do want to say, theoretically, there's no evidence for this as far as I know, but moonlight also reflects a lot of near infrared light. And, if we think about this evolutionarily, we were sleeping outdoors under moonlight, getting infrared light even when we're sleeping. Interesting thing there that, at night, potentially in our evolutionary past, we were probably not only getting melatonin bathing our brain at night, which also acts as an antioxidant at night, but we were also getting melatonin in every single cell of our body, restoring our mitochondria health and aiding in that repair process that occurs at night. So, melatonin, yes, sleep-inducing molecule, but also has strong effects during the day in response to infrared light.
Yeah. And when we think about just how much stress is on our body from modern life, we have all sorts of toxins in our food system, free radicals floating around. We have the stress of being in front of, and sitting all day and being in front of computers, which are largely emitting also blue light, right? In front of our faces and the screens that we have just the normal stress of living in a society that's on all the time with notifications, other things. So wouldn't we want to be giving our body any tools that we could to help us combat some of that? There's a lot of parts in our modern lifestyle that are just not going to change. We probably will have to spend a decent amount of time on screens, especially if we're a student or an entrepreneur or a podcaster or just a human being. But doing simple things and shifting your routine so you can habit stack a little bit and get multiple benefits at the same time, these things compound and they make a huge difference. And in fact, I think this is a good opportunity to give a little bit of this preview on this 2026 light challenge that you put together by talking about the beginner version, because for the audience that's hearing about all these benefits, this is coming from getting regular, consistent sun exposure. There can be a place for red light devices, but red light devices, as we've learned on the podcast, only have so much. And the sun has so much more that we're getting exposed to. So red light devices can be great, but they do not make up for a lack of sun in our lives. And we're not asking people to go outside and burn. We're asking people through this challenge that you put together for the podcast, we're asking for the possibility of consistency that builds up over time that also should be able to give you other benefits. So let's go into, and we should have it on the screen here as well for those that are watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on audio, we'll have the link in the show notes to the PDF as well. But let's go into the beginner challenge that you put together for our audience. If somebody's thinking like, man, I am not getting that much sun on a regular basis. And when I do, it's probably through an office window or a home office window or through a car window. And I really could benefit from taking it up a notch. What's one of the first things that you've put on that beginner challenge?
Yeah. So the first thing is within the first hour of waking up, what you want to do is head outside and get sun exposure for, just about 10 to 30 minutes of bright sunlight into your eyes. Don't stare at the sun, but just, even face the direction of it. And just get that sun exposure. You can go for a little walk. That makes it pretty easy, right? If you have to walk your dog, that's great. I think one of the best things of having a dog is people are getting outside, right? We need more dog owners out there. And I think, so 10 to 30 minutes of unfiltered morning sunlight. So unfiltered, don't wear sunglasses. That's the number one thing I want people to hear is when you're getting morning sunlight, when the UV is not even that strong. In fact, depends on what time you're getting up, but in the very early morning, there is no UV outside getting to you. So you don't need the sunglasses. And the problem with sunglasses is you're not getting the beneficial blue light. So blue light is a spectrum. Certain blue light is good. Other short wavelength blue light can be deleterious. But the more longer wavelength blue light that sets our circadian rhythm is what we need to have elevated focus, elevated mood, elevated performance throughout the day. And so getting that 10 to 30 minutes morning sunlight within the first hour of waking up is going to have drastic impacts. And what I love about light is that I can almost guarantee that people are going to feel these benefits within the first day or two. It is very astonishing. And then even if you barely get outside, you're really going to feel the effects and they're going to be good and your body's going to love it and your body's going to thank you for that. So first step, 10 to 30 minutes, morning, unfiltered sunlight.
To make this consistent in our lives, just think about activities that you're already doing in the morning. You're already drinking your morning coffee. You might be, even though I don't recommend it, you might be reading the newspaper. Let's say even you're scrolling on social media. Well, could you just do those things outside?
Exactly.
For 30 minutes, right? We don't want to upend your life completely, but yeah, okay, you're on social media. You might be doing some doom scrolling. Who doesn't occasionally? Can you do that outside? Can you do that outside?
Just bring those activities outside. Yep.
Bring those activities. You want to walk. You might be walking in a treadmill. why not just go outside a little bit? And now we can have it stack and we can get both of those benefits that are there.
I want to add one point to that. Is that even if it's cloudy, so many people say, "Oh, I live in the UK. I live in a very cloudy area." That doesn't mean there's no sunlight. The sun is still out. If you can see, if you go outside at midnight, then you can tell me that there's no sun, right? But if you're outside and even if it's cloudy, still you're getting those beneficial wavelengths of light into your eyes and onto your skin. And if it is cloudy, I would encourage people to lean more towards 30-minute range. If it's a very bright, no cloud day, you can get away with 10, 15 minutes, but cloudy, lean towards that longer time being outside.
Super powerful. We're going to go back to the challenge in a second. Again, you have 4 items here that are part of this beginner challenge, but just to showcase how powerful regular sunlight at the appropriate dose is, I'm going to be sprinkling in some more of these studies that you've highlighted. And one of those areas is metabolic health. We know when it comes to the 4 biggest drivers of mortality, one of those big drivers is poor metabolic health. Now, that could look like diabetes, full-blown, type 2 diabetes that people are dealing with, but it can also look like, as we know now, it can look like poor metabolic health that is undiagnosed because it doesn't have a name, but you just have out of whack blood sugar. You're on a blood sugar and glycemic roller coaster. Your fasting insulin is really high, but it hasn't been caught by your doctor because not every doctor's looking at that, and people get blood work pretty infrequently. And you feel hangry or you feel low energy on a regular basis. So metabolic health, poor metabolic health, which we've done a lot of episodes on in the past, can show up in all sorts of different ways. And I believe the statistics are that separate from diabetes, there's like over 100 million Americans that are in that pre-diabetic range that are on their way to getting diabetes that's there. Connecting it back to sunlight, some fascinating studies about the role of sunlight exposure on metabolic health. Can you talk about a couple of those?
There's 3 really interesting human studies here. I'll start with the first one. This is a study by Dr. Glenn Jeffrey out of the University College London. And what he did was a really fascinating study. It was a randomized placebo-controlled trial, one of the best studies you can do. What he did was he isolated a specific wavelength of light, 670 nanometers, which falls underneath the red light spectrum. So it's red light. He shined red light on the backs of participants, of healthy adults. And he had 2 groups, right? So he had one group where he shined the red light and one group, again, where he did not shine the red light. So they were the control group. The group that got the red light shined on their back, and it was a very small portion of their back. So it was about this big for people who are listening. It was about like 10% of their total body surface area. He shined the red light on their back for just 15 minutes. And what he found, and this was before glucose consumption. So he shined the red light, then he had the participants drink glucose. So it's just straight glucose, not something people want to do. It probably tastes terrible, but also not healthy. Don't do that. But what he did, he had these people drink glucose after the red light exposure. And then for the next 2 hours, he monitored their blood glucose levels. And what he showed was that those who got the red light had a reduction in total glucose and a reduction in the spike. So there was a dampened spike and a reduced total amount of blood glucose that was circulating in the bloodstream, simply from 15 minutes of red light on a small portion of the back. And the mechanism here that he further studied was increased metabolic function and increased metabolism. So their mitochondria were working harder and were using that glucose that the people were consuming. And the way they found this was he also looked at carbon dioxide output. So when our mitochondria produce ATP, they also produce carbon dioxide. So we breathe in oxygen, right? Our mitochondria use that oxygen to allow the electrons in the electron transport chain to funnel through the electron transport chain, eventually get to oxygen, form water. Our mitochondria actually produce water. And then we breathe out carbon dioxide. That is all because of our mitochondria. And he saw that the people who also got the red light shine on their back also had increased carbon dioxide output, furthering the sort of mechanism at play here, which was increased mitochondrial function. And their mitochondria were making ATP faster and were able to function more properly. So that's the first study on metabolic health. There was another study with older women in their 40s. And actually, I believe it was both men and women in their 40s. And what they actually did was they actually brought these people outside, and they had them lay in the sun and sunbathe. So it was from 9 a.m. to 9:10 a.m. So 10 minutes of sun exposure. And I have actually reached out to the authors of this study, and it was actually only recently, within the past couple of weeks. So during the holiday time, they haven't reached back out to me, but I'm hoping I get a response soon. What was interesting from what I gauged from how they described it in the study, only their face and their hands were exposed to light. So presumably they probably had a t-shirt on and pants on, a long sleeve shirt on and pants on, and their hands and their face were exposed to light. And what they showed, where they basically tested glucose. They did 10 minutes of the sunlight exposure for 7 days. They tested and they also had a control group. So they had people who didn't get the sun, people who got the sun. They showed that on the first day compared to the 7th day, blood glucose levels dropped roughly around 30%, which was also a very similar stat to what we saw in the Glenn Jeffrey study. It was a 27.7% reduction in blood glucose levels with the red light shining on the subject's back. And we saw a very similar, around 30% reduction from simply being outside for 10 minutes in the morning and getting hands and face exposed. The authors of this study attributed these effects to vitamin D production because we do know pretty clearly that vitamin D is able to interact with our circulating blood glucose, and it has an effect on our blood glucose. But my takeaway from this study, and again, this is why I reached out to the authors. I have a few questions with it, but I actually think that more than likely, it was probably the red and infrared light that was doing most of the work here in terms of lowering that blood glucose level. They didn't test vitamin D levels. So if they tested vitamin D levels, and if we saw an increase in vitamin D levels, then maybe we can come up with that conclusion being confirmed. But we don't. But nevertheless, very interesting study there. So lowering blood glucose levels from short amount of time being exposed to sunlight. And then another study that just came out, less than 2 weeks ago now, from the time we're recording this podcast. It was published in Cell Metabolism, one of the leading scientific journals. And before I actually get into the study, I want to give a little bit of background of evidence that we have outside of this study that they actually highlight in the study. And so first off, when we look at older men with insulin resistance, meaning that their body is not responding to insulin properly, right? When we look at those individuals, we see that their muscle cells, so their peripheral clocks in their muscle cells. So we have our central circadian timekeeper, our central circadian clock, and we also have peripheral clocks. So we have peripheral clocks in our muscles. We have peripheral clocks in pretty much all of our organs, right? The peripheral clock in the muscle cells of these individuals are not able to synchronize properly. There's an altered 24-hour rhythmicity in these muscle cells. There's also a lack of rhythmicity of circadian alignment in their mitochondrial metabolism. We see those two same outcomes with individuals who have type 2 diabetes. We take basically muscle cells from them with individuals with type 2 diabetes. We culture those muscle cells and we look at the circadian sort of clock of these muscle cells. Same outcomes, a altered rhythmicity and a lack of rhythmicity within these cells. So that's one. When we look at epidemiological studies, right? So observational studies, again, observational studies cannot prove causation, but we can get strong correlations with them. We see that shift workers, so when we look at shift work epidemiology, shift workers, people who are working under artificial light at night, which is basically messing with their circadian system, it's putting their circadian rhythm out of line. We see that they tend to have a lot more metabolic disorders. So this includes things like diabetes, insulin resistance, things like that, right? They have more metabolic disorders, correlation. However, when we have controlled lab shift work, so when we stimulate shift work in a lab, in a controlled lab environment, we look at biomarkers for these individuals and we see these same negative outcomes that sort of point us to metabolic disorder. So we have that correlation with the shift work, and we have now this controlled lab experiment showing the same thing. And then another piece of evidence that they highlight in this new paper that we're about to discuss, when we look at the pancreas of type 2 diabetics, and we can look at the islets. Islets in a pancreas are basically, you can think of them as these sort of like pockets where things like insulin gets secreted. And we look at these islets. The islets, again, they have a circadian rhythm to them. When we look at the islets of type 2 diabetics, the pancreas, right? When we look at the islets of the type 2 diabetics, we see a decrease in the amplitude of circadian clock genes. So we have these clock genes, which are circadian in nature. So they get expressed at certain times of the day and they get suppressed at other times of the day. And we see a reduced amplitude. So that tells us that there is something wrong from a circadian perspective happening in those islets in the pancreas. We also see a reduced capacity to synchronize the circadian clock of these islets. And what's really fascinating is that if we add in a synthetic molecule to these islets that basically modulate the circadian system and reinforce the circadian system synthetically, right? We can actually see an increase in insulin secretion. So an improvement in insulin secretion. And, that's a synthetic improvement. We're improving it synthetically, but how do we reinforce the circadian clock naturally in our lives? Well, we get out in sunlight and we synchronize our clock with the natural rhythm of the light of sunlight. And so those are really three interesting pieces of evidence that they point in the study. And now we have this brand new study out that looks at humans in a controlled lab. What they did basically was they had people, there was 13 participants, so small sample size, but nevertheless a really, really fascinating study. And it should at the very least prompt us to question and to ask, hey, we need more research on this. And we do. And 13 participants, what they did was the participants were working in a artificially lit environment, so a workplace. So they had their desk and then they had LEDs and they have fluorescent light bulbs, just LEDs and fluorescents, no windows. In a room, just LEDs and fluorescents at normal lighting levels as you would in like a work office. And in the paper, they show a picture of their work environment and you can see just artificially lit light. So they were in that artificially lit environment for 4.5 days. Then there was sort of a lockout phase where they, for I believe it was like 2 weeks, where they went back to their daily lives. And then they came back to the lab, same participants, and they worked in a different environment. And this environment was same, table, chair, their work environment, but there was a window on the side of them and a window in front of them. A full window being exposed to the variations of light that are happening from sunlight. Again, 4.5 days in that environment. Everything else was controlled. So this is really important. And this is why the study is really, really well done, is that they controlled everything else. So the food that these people ate, they controlled. The light that they were exposed to outside of the lab. So for instance, there was no like bathroom in the lab. So if they had to go use the bathroom, they put on red blue light blocking glasses to block those shorter wavelengths of light getting into the eye. And so they had all these other factors controlled. The only difference was where they were sitting, right? If they were sitting in artificially lit or in front of a window. And what they showed was that when the participants sat in front of the window, they had an increase in the normal glucose range. So these participants were in normal glucose range. So what that means is basically their glucose, right, was in where we want it, right? It was in for where we want it for longer periods of time than compared to when they were in the artificially lit environment. They also saw that there was a lower 24-hour glucose variability. So the variability in glucose fluctuations, right? There decrease in that, which is what we want, right? That is a sign of healthier metabolic health. And then the participants, when they were exposed, when they were in front of the window, increased whole body fat oxidation. So they were utilizing fat more than they were carbohydrates, which is another sign of healthier metabolic function. And so we have all these different outcomes. There was, they also showed similarly that the people that were working in front of the windows also had higher levels of melatonin at night, pineal melatonin, so the melatonin that makes you fall asleep, which just confirms what we already know. We know that if you get more sunlight during the day and in the morning, you have higher peaks of melatonin at night, which is what you want. They also looked at the peripheral circadian clock of their muscle cells. So they took muscle biopsies. Basically, what that means is they carved out a piece of these people's muscles, and they looked at the circadian rhythm of these muscles, and they also showed improvement in that. And so clearly, this was circadian in nature. So the other two studies that we were looking at was simply adding red light or sunlight to the body improves glucose metabolism and glucose levels. But this seemed to be circadian in nature. So they were aligning their circadian system and they were having improved metabolic function. Now, a hypothesis that I have from this study as well is not only do I think the aligning their circadian rhythm helped, which definitely did, obviously, but also through the window, again, they were getting more red light, and they actually they use a spectrometer, which is basically a device that reads the spectrum of light coming from a device. They use a spectrometer and they tested the artificially lit environment, and then they tested the window environment. And you can see in the study that the window environment did have way more red light than the artificially lit environment. The artificially lit environment was very concentrated in the short blue wavelengths of light, which is typical from LEDs and fluorescent light bulbs. But these participants that were under the window, they were getting exposed to more red and infrared light, which could have helped their mitochondria, could have helped their metabolic function that way. So 3 really interesting human studies that all point to sunlight, which is abundant in infrared and red light, and red light. So if you want, like you said, there is a time and place for red light therapy, isolated red light. I encourage people to opt for a red incandescent light bulb because that's very broad band. Red light therapy uses very short wavelength or very narrow band red light, which is great because that's what they are using in these studies and they're showing benefits. So no doubt there are going to be benefits from that. But like Glenn Jeffrey has even showed that when you're using an incandescent light bulb, which is very broad band, so a lot of red, a lot of infrared, you're getting even better benefits. So again, these studies are all pointing to sunlight and light affects our metabolic health, and we are living in an environment that is lacking these wavelengths of light and lacking natural sunlight that is affecting our metabolic health and not not in a good direction, right? In a poor direction. And we're seeing these consequences. We have, like you said, more pre-diabetes, diabetes just in general is at an all-time high. So light clearly affects your metabolic health, and that is something that people need to realize.
The more and more that people hear, the more that I hope that they feel excited about taking on this challenge, which is largely free to do. There might be some low-cost suggestions inside of there, like getting blue light blocking glasses, which we'll get into a second. But largely, most of these things are free, and they're not going to take you a lot of extra time. They're small little changes. So let's continue down the beginner challenge. We'll get to advanced in a second. And the next big recommendation that you have is taking your lunch break outdoors. Talk to us about this.
Yes, this is so important. And, eating food spikes your glucose, right? You're consuming glucose, and you are having a spike in glucose as should happen naturally. And as we're seeing, right, if you're exposed to natural light and longer wavelengths light, that glucose spike is not going to be as high, and you're going to have improvements in your blood glucose. And so simply eating outside, you're going to be exposed to these longer wavelengths of light, and it's going to help your body properly utilize that food that you're eating. And no matter what the food is, right? We saw in this last study that I just mentioned, the food was the same. The only thing that was different was the light, and there was metabolic improvements. So no matter what you're eating, right? Obviously, we want to eat more whole food. We want to eat healthier foods, no doubt about that. But no matter what you're eating, simply eating outside is going to help you metabolically function. And, so this, you can eat outside in direct sunlight, or again, eat under shade. That's okay. If you're eating under shade, you're still getting those long wavelengths of infrared light. Now, I will say that there is definitely going to be a benefit from if you can eat outside in direct sunlight. And this is going to be beneficial because not only are you producing vitamin D, which also has metabolic implications and helps your metabolic health, and also has a bunch of other implications, but you're also producing things like nitric oxide. Nitric oxide helps your cardiovascular system, right? So your blood vessels dilate, more blood flow, improve cardiometabolic health. And so I think at the very least, just step outside, even if it's cold. People live away from the equator, right? Bundle up. That's okay. This infrared light is able to penetrate all the way through many, many layers of clothing, right? If you have six layers of clothing on, it will penetrate through those clothing. It'll still get to your body. It will still have beneficial effects. And so whether it be in direct sunlight or under shade, eat outside. It's going to help you long term. And I would even say that you're probably going to feel the difference as well, right? People get a lot of like crashes after they eat lunch. May that be from the food they eat? Probably. But also from the light that they're eating under, right? They're eating under these lights that are rich in blue. And, Glenn Jeffrey actually showed this was in bees, so not in humans, because he saw it as unethical to look at this in humans. But he actually showed that if you irradiate bees, if you shine blue light at bees, their glucose actually increases after glucose consumption. And then he showed if you shine red light at bees, their glucose decreases. That's how he actually went to go on to do the study where they shine red light on the backs of people. And so, theoretically, if you're eating under artificial light, right, you may actually have worsened, blood glucose spikes than if you were to just like eat in the dark, So yes, so eat outside. It could be a great way to improve your metabolic health. And if you want to take that even a step further, eat outside. And then after you eat, go for a little walk outside. Go for a postprandial stroll, right? After you eat, walking will allow your muscles in your calf, especially, to contract, and your calf muscle actually takes in a lot of glucose. So that will also help dampen that glucose spike, improve metabolic function.
That's awesome. All right, number 3 on the beginner challenge. We've already talked about getting 10 to 30 minutes of unfiltered morning sunlight. Now the recommendation is on number 3, get 10 to 30 minutes of unfiltered evening sunlight. Anything you want to add to this idea?
Yeah. So just, again, unfiltered. So don't wear sunglasses. And when that sun is setting, when you see that orange glow in the sky, go out and, 10, 30 minutes if you want to go out for a walk, right? Maybe you ate dinner and then you go out for a walk afterwards. That's also going to improve your blood glucose spike after the dinner. But yeah, so setting that or anchoring that circadian rhythm at night, because at night, we need that stimulus into our eyes that, hey, the sun is setting. It's time to now start producing pineal melatonin. It's time to get to bed. It's going to start getting dark, ready for bed, ready for restoration throughout the night. And so again, anchoring that circadian rhythm from getting bright morning sunlight at night, and getting bright sunlight during the day and dark light at night. So no light at night, but also seeing that stimulus of it's getting dark is also going to help anchor that circadian system and have improved health benefits there.
Yeah. I know for myself personally, when I can get out, walk, get a little bit of evening sun, I sleep way better. And there are times where I don't do it, and I notice that I just don't sleep as well. And so even this challenge is a good reminder for me, who tries to pay a lot of attention to this area, that it's that consistency over time that really starts to make those differences that everybody notices. Okay, number 4 on the beginner challenge, because this is a light challenge, a 2026 light challenge, 21-day light challenge, is dimming the lights at night and or wearing blue light blocking glasses. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so this is really key. So again, at night, you want that darkness. Now, we'll get to the advanced, we'll take this one step further, but for the beginners, simply just dim your overhead lights. So even if you have LEDs in your house, right, just dim those lights to a degree where it's darker in the house, right? We want that darkness. We don't want that bright light. And I will tell you, and I can attest to this personally. I think many other people who have been focusing on their light environment can attest to this as well. When you start focusing on your light environment, like you sort of like you cannot even look at bright light at night. Like for me, if I come into my house, it's too much. If I come to my house and the lights are all the way on and like my mom's cooking dinner, I'm like, Mom, oh no, you gotta turn the lights down. And so it's so much. But yeah, so just dim those lights. And then also you can wear blue light blocking glasses. When you're getting blue light blocking glasses, get amber tinted ones. So ones that have red or amber lenses, because there's this whole controversy with blue light blocking glasses. Clear blue light blocking glasses, they don't work. Those are definitely a scam. So clear blue light blocking glasses, they do block blue light, but they block blue light from 400 nanometers to 420 nanometers. Blue light that's coming from LEDs, fluorescents, and screens and things like that is 420 nanometers to around 500 nanometers. So they're not blocking the blue light that you're actually being exposed to. So clear ones, don't get those. Get amber tinted ones. And what those amber tinted blue light blocking glasses are going to do is that they are going to block the shorter wavelengths of blue and green light. So not only at night do we want to block blue light, but we also want to block green light because green light is also can suppress melatonin production. And so by blocking these wavelengths, our body is going to produce pineal melatonin, helping us fall asleep more easily. And it's going to also make you feel more tired and more relaxed. So dim the lights. And if you want, purchase a pair of blue light blocking glasses.
We've all been to, well, maybe not everybody, but you've been into like a pharmacy late at night or like a mattress store, and it's so bright. It's so intense. We as the human being side of us, we can only see certain wavelengths of light, but we have to remember that every light that we're being exposed to is having these positive or negative effects on our mitochondria. And it's like sugar. It's like when you finally start dialing back sugar and you're eating more whole foods, when you go back to eating something that you used to eat, you're like, whoa, this is way too sweet. You increase your sensitivity to it and you get used to it and it starts to feel good. And you notice other aspects. You notice that when you come into an environment like your house and you dim the lights a little bit and you put on your blue light blocking glasses, which is part of my ritual coming home late at night, you notice that your nervous system is a lot more chill. You notice that you feel more relaxed. You notice that your heart rate starts to come down a little bit if you were a little bit amped up. So all these things practiced consistently, you should be noticing little improvements that when combined together have a major impact on your health. In fact, when my wife and I only have one wife, so I don't know if I said my now wife, but before she was my girlfriend. And I noticed that late at night, sometimes I would dim the lights in our room and I would have my blue light blocking glasses on, and she was kind of getting used to it. Initially, she would complain a little bit and say, it's too dark in here. I can't see everything. And I'd say, okay, let's put this red light in this area or that area. She would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth, shower, everything. And she'd come back to bed and she was wired. And I was thinking, man, what's going on exactly? Like, I thought we were like dimming all the lights. And I realized that secretly she'd go in the bathroom, she'd turn on all the lights at night, and she'd come back and she'd be so wired. Finally, I convinced her to give it a try, almost like this 21-day challenge. And she noticed she would come back to bed and she was a lot more chill. So not to throw you under the bus, Yasmin, but just a little anecdote I've seen in my own life. You have a little bonus section for people. I think more and more people are waking up to this idea. And that's the idea of turning on night shift or color filters on your phone. We've written about this in our newsletter, but for those that are not familiar, just give a little bit of some context around this recommendation.
Yeah. So if you have an iPhone, you can turn on night shift. What night shift will do, and so I have my night shift on 24/7. I have it set to just be on all day long. And what night shift will do will just slightly reduce the amount of blue light. So you'll have a little bit more of like a yellow tone on your phone, right? And then at night, what I do, and I have my phone right here for people who are viewing this online, if you just triple click your side button, you can set this up in settings, right? Your phone basically turns red. And basically what that is doing is color filter, like through color filters, like on the settings of your iPhone, right? You're basically not completely eliminating blue light, but the blue light is coming down to basically nothing. So you're pretty much removing pretty much all the blue and green light wavelengths. So that's going to help you a lot because, obviously your phone is so close to your face. So that is also going to have a huge impact. If you have it very bright and a lot of blue light coming into your eyes, that's going to have an impact on your melatonin production. There's tons of studies on this. Harvard did a study using a iPad basically, right? And they show that your melatonin gets really, really reduced when you're being exposed to these shorter wavelengths of blue light at night. So yeah, so iPhone, another just extra little tip, turn that night shift and color filters on, and you'll be golden there.
I'm on the same wavelength as you. I use my color filter at night.
Yep.
We can link to a little tutorial. It's super easy, but if you've never done it before, we have a link in the show notes to a little tutorial that we featured in our newsletter. Okay, Jonathan, let's go into some of the advanced recommendations. But before we do, if somebody feels like, hey, I'm not sure how much light I'm getting, I kind of don't think I'm getting that much. In the beginner standpoint, if we think about some of these recommendations, is there a number that they should be targeting, of light exposure in a day that feels like, hey, this is a good place to start off at least? If I look at what you're recommending, if we have 10 to 30 minutes of morning light, we have 10 to 30 minutes of evening light. Let's take the upper recommendation of that or a medium recommendation of that. So that's 20 minutes, it's 40 minutes. You're eating your lunch break, eating lunch outdoors. That can be, another 30 minutes that's there, right? So we're around like 70 minutes. Is that a good place to start off if you're feeling like, hey, I'm pretty deficient. I'm trying to get somewhere between 60 to 90 minutes of outdoor time during the day?
Yeah. So I think that's a very strong starting point, right? If you're around like 75 minutes of, morning, evening, middle of the day, that's a good starting point. Now, I would always say that if you can get outside more, that's what you need, right? You need to get outside as much as you can. Now, if you're in direct sunlight, we don't want to burn. So that's where we're seeing these consequences of like melanoma and these skin cancers that we don't want. We don't want to burn. We want to have gradual sun exposure. If you're going out in the middle of the day, you want gradual sun exposure. And so, yeah, so I think that's a good starting point. But if you can get more, right? If you have an hour lunch break, spend the whole hour outside, right? Whenever you have a break, just get outside. Again, you don't need to be in direct sunlight. Just get in shade. You need exposure just to that natural light, even the brightness of the light, right? Just being outside, just that brightness of the light, even though it may look bright indoors in an office, that is just your eyes. So your eyes work on a relative basis. So if you have a lot of blue, basically it tricks your brain thinking it's really bright, but it's actually not. So if you look at the lux is the measurement of how bright light is. Being outside on a non-cloudy day can be upwards of 100,000 lux, whereas indoors you can be lucky if you have 1,000 lux, right? So huge drastic differences between just the brightness of light. That's a good starting point. If you can get out more, do that. Again, don't burn. We're not advocating for that, but get sun exposure, get bright light into the eyes if it's in shade, if it's in direct sunlight.
Amazing. So now let's go to the advanced, because I think that a lot of our audience is probably hitting, a decent chunk is hitting some of those beginner recommendations, maybe a couple of things that are new to them or a reminder to double down on that. Let's get into the advanced section. So what is the number one recommendation on the advanced challenge, the advanced 2026 light challenge that you put together for our community?
Yeah. So if you're doing everything the beginner challenge is doing, we can move on to the advanced. The first thing is to view the sunrise. So in the beginner, it was 10 to 30 minutes of unfiltered morning sunlight within the first hour of waking up. That may not necessarily be the sunrise. Advanced, go view the sunrise. So yes, that is early. I did it this morning. I did it yesterday. I did it the day before. I did it the day before. I'm very lucky. I live 5 minutes away from the beach, so I get to drive a quick, short drive onto the beach, and it's amazing. But even if you're not living near the beach, even if you can't see the horizon, get outside for sunrise. Why is this so important? So during the sunrise, we have a huge concentration of those longer wavelengths, red, and a ton of infrared light. This is because of a phenomenon called Rayleigh scattering. So the blue light gets scattered into the atmosphere. The red light gets concentrated where the sun is, and you are being exposed to a ton of those red light wavelengths. And now this is really important because another aspect of sunbathing, which we'll get into in the next step here, infrared light from sunrise actually protects your body from UV damage in the middle of the day. So being exposed to that infrared light in the morning is going to, in some cases, potentially help you prevent sunburn and just help your body, prevent the negative consequences of too much UV light during the middle of the day. And so this could be, again, because of that subcellular melatonin being produced, acting like an antioxidant, also because of mitochondrial function, things like this. But so yeah, getting that longer wavelengths of red and infrared light in the morning can help with that. And then also, again, setting that circadian system. So yes, viewing bright morning sunlight unfiltered within the first hour waking up is great. Your cortisol is going to increase, which is what you actually want. Cortisol is not the stress hormone. It's a glucocorticoid that responds to glucose and all these other things. But we want that high amount of cortisol in the morning, low amount of melatonin in the morning. And you're going to get that from viewing morning sunlight in the first hour waking up. But viewing the sunrise, and Andrew Huberman actually has published a paper on this. It's the contrast of the yellow, orange, red versus the blue above the sun when it's rising, right? It's that contrast that actually tells our brain and our neural circuits that it is morning and it's time to activate all the things that we need to be activated during the day. And so viewing that contrast, viewing that sunrise is going to be beneficial for your circadian system. Also, you're getting all the red and infrared light, which is going to be utilizing, what these studies are showing, what Glenn Jeffrey has showed, what these red light wavelengths are doing to our mitochondria. So viewing the sunrise, I like to say sunlight before screen light. So don't look at your phone right away. Go seek the sun. Go seek the sunrise in the morning.
I love that. Okay, let's get to number 2 on the advanced, which you hinted towards. And there is a way to gear up for this, slowly, or rather gradually. And that's the idea of sunbathing midday 3 to 5 times a week.
Yes. So this is a key pillar in advancing your light exposure. So sunbathing in the middle of the day. Now, it's actually really interesting. So if you look at the work of Dr. Alexander Wunsch, he's an MD, PhD out of Germany. He's one of the leading experts in photobiology, right? How light affects our biology. He puts it really interesting that sunbathing in the middle of the day is actually better than sunbathing, at like 10, 11 a.m. Because in the middle of the day, there's a higher proportion of UVB relative to UVA. So UV light can also be split up into UVA, UV, and UVB. And UVB is what produces vitamin D. UVA produces nitric oxide, but UVB produces vitamin D and also is what allows our body to tan, right? And so there's a higher proportion of UVB, whereas UVA is where we see, more like wrinkles and potentially skin damage and things like that. So when you sunbathe, make sure it's in the middle of the day and start out slow and start out gradually, as you said, right? Don't go, out. If you've never sunbathed before, don't go out for a whole hour and lay there in the sun. You're probably going to burn. We don't want that. And it's very, very nuanced, right? So, your skin type. So there's a Fitzpatrick scale of skin type, right? Fitzpatrick 1 is very, very, very white skin. And then it goes up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, where further down the Fitzpatrick scale, you have darker skin tones. And if you're very light skin, right, you're going to be more susceptible to sunburn. And so keep in mind, not only your skin type, right, but also, how long you're being exposed to that light, right? And then, there's many different, even how much we shower. So I've had the privilege of meeting Dr. Alexander Wunsch, and we've had conversations about this. And even the amount of time you shower and actually clean your skin can affect your sun damage. Let's say, I hate using that word because it makes us think like, oh, the sun's bad. Too much sun exposure can have negative consequences. Too much direct sun exposure can have negative consequences. But the dead skin cells that are on top of your skin actually helps with that UV exposure. So it actually is sort of like a natural sunblock. And when Dr. Alexander Wunsch has explained this to me, and when you actually wash your skin too much, you're actually removing those dead skin cells, and you're removing a layer of skin that would actually be protective. So really interesting there. And he's German, so he's so funny about this. But it's like, to him, it's like crazy that Americans wash their body like multiple times a day. But no. So like it's very nuanced with this whole sunbathing. But what I want people to do is start out slow and gradually, and that could even be 3 to 5 minutes. If you're very pale, that may be all you need, especially if it's very high UV, right? So it also depends when during the year you're sunbathing. If it's during the summer and you're closer to the equator, whatever your latitude is, right? It's going to depend. So if you have, I live in Florida, the UV can be up to like 11 here during the summer, during the middle of the day. And for someone who's really pale, if you go out there for even like 30 minutes, that could be too much. So we want to start off gradually. We want to build up our melanin, right? So a tan is healthy. A lot of dermatologists will say it's not, but if we look at the new dermatology research, right? If we look at Dr. Richard Weller, what the research that he's doing, sunlight is beneficial. Sunbathing is beneficial. We need those UV light wavelengths. We don't want too much of it, and that's where the nuance is, right? So don't get too much. Be intentional about it. Don't burn, but get that midday sun exposure. Again, maybe start with 3 to 5 minutes and just see how your body reacts to that, right? If you are darker skin, you may need longer time. So this is a bio-individual approach here that you need to understand for yourself in terms of, am I getting too much or am I getting too little, right? You need to find that balance. So really the big thing is don't burn, but make sure you're getting those midday sun exposure onto your skin.
Yeah, love all those recommendations. And if anybody wants to dive a little bit deeper into the aspect of, does the sun age skin? And yes, there is a component where the sun ages the skin, and there are also very practical ways to be mindful of that. We had Dr. Teo Soleimani on the podcast, who is a dermatologist and a plastic surgeon who specializes in the worst types of skin cancer. He's here in Los Angeles. Side note, he actually went to high school with my wife's cousin, and we had him on the podcast earlier in the year, and he went into all the nuances around melanoma, what he sees in his clinic and his practice, the research that's there, which echoes a lot of what you shared, Jonathan, as well as the fact that so much of the melanoma that he was seeing on his patients was actually on parts of their body that weren't even regularly getting skin exposure. And in addition to that, he does talk about the aspect that there's no denying that the sun and exposure to the sun will, quote unquote, the way that we think in modern life, people all want that super baby skin. That's what's marketed to, especially a lot of women that are out there. He said there's no denying that the sun and a lot of exposure to the sun will age the skin, and you can be protective around that with mineral sunscreens that are there that don't have all the negative ingredients that we want to stay away from. And there's even trends in places like China and Japan where people are obsessed with, being fair-skinned. It's like a status symbol in society, skinism, where even there's awareness around how beneficial the sun is. And maybe people go and sunbathe, but they're deciding that they're going to cover their face a little bit with some protective aspects of it. Hey, at least your body is getting some of that sun exposure. I'm not worried about that. And I think that all the data and much of the data that you focused on is like, hey, and I know this is easy for me to say as a guy, men have thicker skin. They actually do have thicker skin. And I know it's easier to say this as a guy, but I'd much rather get all the benefits that come from the sun exposure and not, overly obsess about the damage that's happening to my skin, as long as I'm avoiding, burning, as you've talked about.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to remind people of this, is that like we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, more sun exposure leads to longer lives. So, and Richard Weller is doing a lot of research on the risk benefit ratio of sun exposure, right? And we are seeing that potentially, definitely sun burning, we see increases risk of melanoma, right? But potentially sunburning could also increase risk of other skin cancers. But what is the risk benefit ratio? And it is looking like you have more benefits from getting more sun exposure than you do from getting less sun exposure. So again, I want people to remember that there is a risk benefit ratio. You maybe have a couple more wrinkles, maybe some skin cancers if you get too much sun exposure, but you're getting a reduction in all these really deadly cancers like breast cancer, like colorectal cancer, like all these cancers that we definitely do not want. So again, risk benefit ratio and yeah, all your points you made, great.
Yeah. Okay. On the advanced challenge, the 21-day Jonathan Light Challenge that you put together for our audience, the final recommendation on the advanced category for our audience is this idea of eliminating overhead lights at night and using dim incandescent light bulbs. So let's talk about the benefits of eliminating all overhead lights at night and transitioning back over to God forbid, according to the sustainability community, these incandescent light bulbs.
Overhead lights, why they are a problem at night is because, and we have tons of papers looking at this, is that light coming in from the top of the retina actually suppresses melatonin more than light coming in from the bottom of the retina. So, and this makes sense, right? During the day, where's the sun? The sun's above us. The sun's not below us, right? The sun's above us. Light coming in from the top down, top of the retina down. That light is what suppresses melatonin. Also, obviously, the color, right? We want less blue. We want more longer red, like fire. So we want to eliminate those overhead lights. And my recommendation here is to add in incandescent lamps or just light that is either at eye level or below, right? So that's what we want. Light at eye level or below, which would include lamps. So things like incandescent light bulbs can be very beneficial here because I wear my blue blockers almost religiously. But when I'm in my house and I have control over my lights, I have these just standard filament incandescent light bulbs that are more orange hue. I dim them down. I put them at really like hip level. I have, just little nightstands that are like hip level. I put them on there. I dim them down and I just use that. And I don't even really need blue light blocking glasses there because that light from those incandescents, especially if they're amber tinted, they aren't emitting those short wavelength blue and green lights. And what's really great is they're emitting these longer wavelengths of infrared light. And again, that infrared light is really, really beneficial. And what's interesting looking at this from an evolutionary standpoint, we evolved around fireplaces at night, right? So once the sun set, we would have a fire. That fire emits red, as you can see, orange, red light, as well as infrared. That's where the heat comes from. When you put your hand near a fire, with that heat that you're feeling is infrared light. And so these incandescent light bulbs resemble very closely to those fireplaces. And one point I want to make on the energy efficiency is that we think about energy efficiency, right? With these LED light bulbs, right? We're getting more blue, more blue, more blue, more energy efficient, more energy efficient, more energy efficient. But the energy that's coming out of an incandescent light bulb, sure, there's a lot of energy going to waste, quote unquote. I have waste in air quotes here. There's a lot of energy going to waste, but that energy is not actually going to waste. That energy is going into our body, and our body is using that energy to fuel itself, right? So it's not a waste product of energy coming from those incandescent light bulbs. It is, our body is utilizing that energy. So you can say it's wasteful, but I think we need to shift our focus on, the health benefits and the utilization that our body is utilizing this energy that's coming from this incandescent light bulb. And I think, that is one of most beneficial things that we can do is like, we need to get back to healthy built environments. Our built environment is not suitable for human health. And if we can change that one way by getting incandescent light bulbs back in, and this can even be, at your desk. If you ask any of my friends in college, I not joking here, I bring an incandescent light bulb everywhere I go. It's in my backpack. I know it sounds crazy to a lot of people, and if you're not in college, if you're working in an environment, just buy an incandescent light bulb and place it on your desk on a little lamp, right? But I quite literally bring an incandescent light bulb everywhere I go. I want to point out this paper really quickly here. Another paper by Glenn Jeffrey. It's not published yet. It's in preprint. It's going to be published in Scientific Reports, Nature Scientific Reports, very reputable journal. Not published yet again. I read the preprint paper. Literally what they did is they had these participants that were in a artificially lit environment, no windows. They tested their color contrast in their eyes. So basically, just very simply, color contrast. If you have an improvement in color contrast, that you can think of it just as an improvement in visual function. Okay, let's just keep it simple like that. Improvement in visual function. They found a very strong improvement in visual function simply by adding 2 60-watt incandescent light bulbs to the desk. Now, the participants weren't getting the incandescent light bulb shined on them. No, it was just added to their desk, just in their work environment. Nothing else changed. And they had crazy improvements in color contrast and in visual function. And these improvements lasted 2 weeks and lasted 4 weeks. So they went 2 weeks back, they tested it, 4 weeks back, they tested it. They had a control group in the study. So I cannot wait for the study to come out, because this should change so many things. Because a simple light bulb is affecting your mitochondria and affecting your health. It's crazy to think about. And I know it's crazy. And my friends think I'm crazy when I bring around an incandescent light bulb everywhere, but it has real health benefits. And we just need to bring those back. So anyways, getting back to this last pillar of this challenge here, eliminate overhead lighting, and, just get amber tinted incandescent if you can. If you can't get incandescent, amber tinted LEDs is fine. It's better than bright LEDs, but incandescent would be best. And if you want to, I can give you some recommendations to some bulbs that I really like. But yeah, that would be crazy. You're gonna feel these improvements, and your body's going to thank you very long term. So that is the last step in the advanced challenge there.
Well, I'm glad you're crazy about that, because now, especially as we're winding down today's episode, you've prepared and shared all these incredible studies with us, and you do such a good job communicating them. Thank you again. You've made our audience a little crazy too, because how can you hear about all these benefits and not feel like this is something that you want to double down on in 2026? So if being crazy is how you feel more healthy, especially when it comes to this category of light, sign me up, because I want a lot of those benefits as well. So, Jonathan, anything else you want to share for our audience, context-wise, of who you are and why you're so passionate?
Yeah, for sure. I was raised in a very holistic household. So we, did a lot of preventative things. We focused a lot on diet, exercise, sun exposure as well. We had a lot of, different modalities, infrared saunas. We have the same infrared sauna down in my garage that we've had before I was even born. So my family is very into this. My mom raised all of us on a very holistic, healthy lifestyle. And growing up, that was sort of my mindset. It was like, there wasn't really thoughts about like going to the doctor or medication like that stuff, because like, quite frankly, and obviously this is very anecdotal, this is my story, but also, I have 3 older siblings. My mom also, she's 61 and really one of the healthiest 61-year-olds I've probably ever met in my life.
Shout out to your mom.
Oh yeah. It was very prominent to me that the things that you do in your life, what you put in your body, what you put on your body, what you surround your body with, it has an effect both long-term and short-term on your health. I didn't really get into light until about a year and a half ago. Light was always, my mom always told us, get outside, go play outside in the grass, in the sunshine. But I started really getting into the science, and it was just what got me so passionate about the science was that just over 3 years ago, my dad actually passed away. That changed a lot in my life. But one of the things was focusing more on health. I was, still healthy, but it was really, I was just listening to whatever my mom said, taking it for her word. She was right in many cases, but, just taking it for her word. And, I was believing these things without, really knowing the science behind it. So I was like, if I have these beliefs, I should probably, figure out like, if this is this true, obviously I saw it in my life to be true, but I wanted to see like, is the science actually there? So I started reading books, started listening to podcasts, starting diving into the literature. And I was seeing that there is so much science to back all this stuff up. So right now I'm a college student. I'm a pre-med student on the pre-med track, majoring in biology, minoring in neuroscience. And I have this, huge passion for translating the science because that's what I love. I just love reading research and, through my academic endeavors, I'm learning as I go in terms of like how to read research and like all these things. And I love the academic aspect of it. I love translating what I am learning to the general public through social media, right? And it's really great because not only, am I learning through it, but I'm also teaching other people. I'm getting great feedback. Like people are loving and they're implementing these things and it's changing their lives. And it's so great to see that. And my ultimate goal with all of this, is just to help people live healthier lives. If we can understand the science behind these things and we can actually apply them in our lives and see these changes in our health outcomes, both right now, but also long-term, we will have an appreciation for how lifestyle, diet, exercise, sunlight exposure has on our health. So that's a little bit about me, my backstory, and where I am today.
That's great, man. And I love the enthusiasm and, my condolences around your dad passing, my acknowledgement of how you have kept his legacy alive, of all the things that he stood for, all the things that your family stands for still, and are turning that into practical things that other people can do. And so that's just really powerful. So thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
Jonathan, this has been fantastic. You sent over, I think, 16 plus studies. We only were able to cover, I think, like 7 or 8 of them, which is still a lot. Hats off to you. Maybe we can include some of the ones that we didn't cover in the link in the show notes. But also, for those that are listening, please follow Jonathan online because you do these incredible breakdowns on X, on Instagram. A lot of our audience is probably on Instagram. You do these regular breakdowns as this new research starts to come out there and people can watch them and walk away with the top bullet points that will help remind them how to prioritize this area that is super under prioritized. We have to fight hard to actually prioritize light in our life. But once you do it, like a lot of other healthy behaviors, it starts to become normal because you feel good, right? Like Tony Robbins has that quote. He says, "Nothing tastes as good as being truly healthy feels." And sure, I'm sure there are a lot of things that actually taste pretty good, but a lot of my audience knows that when you do these things, you don't have to continue out of willpower. You do them because you feel fantastic. And light is one of those areas where you can actually start to feel fantastic if you take these tiny steps and you're consistent with them, which is why we put together this challenge. So we have the link for the challenge in the show notes. You can download it as a PDF. It's super easy. We have the links to Jonathan's, all your social media accounts. You're very active. People can follow you on there. Jonathan, as we wind down here today, any final words you want to leave for our audience?
Yeah. Well, first off, Dhru, I want to thank you for having me on the podcast. And, you can see my passion about this, right? And I want this information to get out there. So thank you for allowing this information to get out there. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share that information with people. But yeah, I want to thank the audience for listening. But also, my one piece of advice is to get more natural sunlight.
Yes. Hear, hear. That's what today's episode is about. Jonathan, you brought the fire to the light episode with your passion and your enthusiasm. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
Take 500 lux. On a dim day, you're getting 10,000 lux. On a cloudy day, 10,000 lux. And if it's a bright sunny day, you're getting 50,000, even 100,000 lux.